I think that one of the great advantages of a web organization is that power and influence operate somewhat differently. I will give the example of Intel, where I really began to understand this. For the Web of Inclusion, I was doing a case study on Intel, particularly in terms of their Intel Inside campaign, when a group of fairly out-of-the-loop trademark lawyers and marketing people in Denver and one area in Santa Clara had come up with the idea of Intel branding itself directly to the consumer, as opposed to just being an equipment manufacturing company that only sold to the computer manufacturers. This idea came very much from the ranks, and Intel threw some money at it, and it ended up entirely transforming the whole organization, who their customer is, who they are. I mean, a complete transformation of the organization that came from a very out-of-the-loop kind of, at the time, considered somewhat off-the-wall effort within the organization. It did not come from the executive committee. But the executive committee had the intelligence and the confidence to be able to run with it, even though it had not originated through them. I was talking one morning to a fellow, Ted Jenkins. I still remember him and his office. He had been the sixth person hired by Intel when it first began. And I was asking him, because he was sort of the institutional memory of the organization, and everyone acknowledged him to be so. And I asked him what he thought it was about the organization that made it possible for such an out-of-the-loop group to put in place a change that eventually ended up changing the entire dynamic and strategy of that very large organization. And he said, pretty much without hesitating, I think it's because power, the nature of power in Intel is different. He said in most organizations, and every organization I had been a part of before I, speaking as Ted Jenkins, had joined Intel, power was based pretty much solely on position, where you stood in the pecking order. He said here power is more diffuse and less defined. He said certainly there is a power of position. He said, but there's also the power of personal authority, how your colleagues look at you. There's the power of expertise, and there's the power of connections. He said the people here who tend to really get resources to move are the people who have great expertise. He said maybe we honor this because 90% of the hires we do are engineers of one kind or another. Tend to have a great expertise, tend to have broad and unusual connections within the organization, so they kind of know who the go-to people are out of their bailiwick, and tend to have a lot of personal authority within the organization. He said, and that's really how we operate. And that tends to undermine the emphasis on positional power in the organization. He said, now, in every organization, there are people who have greater power than you would see by virtue of their position, because of their personal authority, their connections, or their expertise. He said, however, in most organizations, A, that's not acknowledged, and B, that is seen as undermining the people who should be in the positions of power. He said, here it's out in the open. I think that's a good definition of how power functions in the web.